I'd like to introduce myself to you. My name is Larry Benko. My amateur radio call sign is W0QE. I'm a retired electrical engineer and I've been a beta tester of SimSmith for the past several years. This video is the first of several which will be targeted at beginning users of SimSmith and those who would like to improve their knowledge of RF. These videos will feature often misunderstood topics in amateur radio as examples. I will demonstrate how SimSmith works by analyzing circuits which will allow these topics to be easily understood. This is the usefulness and power of SimSmith. Hope these videos will be useful. So what exactly is SimSmith? SimSmith can be thought of as a Smith chart program on steroids. Impedances and admittances are shown on the standard Smith chart like most Smith chart programs do. But it acts also as a general RF analysis program if you wish. It can analyze multi-node circuits, which is extremely valuable. And it can deal easily with non-ideal components and loads. A good example of a non-ideal load is an antenna. It does not present the same impedance at various frequencies, and SimSmith deals with that just fine. It's got powerful plotting and sweeping for all parameters. It operates in real time for all but the largest sweeps. To keep SimSmith operating in a mode that seems responsive, it sweeps all circuits up to a certain value, and you can set that value real time. And if you really want to do a large number of sweeps for some reason, you can set that large number to be a non-real-time event. What it does steady state analysis. It does not do transient analysis, and the circuit must be linear and time invariant. That turns out to be most circuits in RF that involve matching and transmission lines. It does not deal with diodes, and it does not deal with other components like that. But that really is not much of a limitation for the general use of it. It's 100% free. No nagware, no donationware, nothing. And we can thank Ward Harriman, AE6TY, for that. It runs on Windows, Macs, and Linux PCs. All right, so what can it do? Well, it does everything a simple Smith chart program can do, such as inductor capacitor matching, transmission line matching, including stubs, which is the general use for most Smith chart programs. The original Smith chart, when it was developed in such a manner that those components, inductors, capacitors, and transmission lines, had predictable paths on the Smith chart so that a person who was graphing manually was able to do the problem, solve the problem in a reasonable period of time. It has multiple generator types, which are something most of the standard Smith chart programs do not have. They just have a typical 1-volt source or a 1-watt source or something like that. I can have a 1500-watt generator if I want. I can have a fixed voltage generator. I can do lots of different things. I can have a generator that has impedances that are reactive as its source impedance if you wish. It will calculate voltage, current, and phases for the voltage and currents, and power consumed in all the components very easily. This will allow you to build a circuit and size the components appropriately. It's nice to know that you have a match, perhaps, if you build some kind of a circuit, but it's kind of nice to know if it's got 10,000 volts on the capacitor or not, or it's got 25 or 50 or 100 amps to an inductor. It can also be used to calculate impedances from the generator to the load. I call this the tuner solution. We also call it running SimSmith in reverse direction. It solves a very interesting class of problems which is often needed, and that is we don't have a fixed load impedance that we're trying to match to a generator. We have a circuit in the middle, and we want to know what impedances it could match. And I'll explain that later in some other videos. So with SimSmith, we can analyze tuners of all flavors, link coupled, transmission line, LC, anything you wish, filters, inductor capacitor filters, crystal filters, transmission line filters, power splitters, combiners, common mode chokes, balance, And most importantly, multi-node circuits. There are plenty of circuits that you just can't put in a general SimSmith general Smith chart program. It imports data from network analyzers and programs like NEC to accurately analyze circuits such as antennas, inductors and capacitors, and ferrite beads. Most inductors that you use generally are being used at a frequency often where they're no longer an inductor, but they begin to show the effects of a parallel resonance. Most capacitors have some series impedance resistance in series with them. Ferrite beads are notoriously nonlinear, but they are linear and time invariant at a given frequency, which is all that's important. More than one circuit can be analyzed at a time. Or you can even run multiple program instances. I often run multiple program instances of SimSmith, and you can compare stuff that way. However, in one SimSmith instance, you're capable of putting a block or several blocks called an isolation block, which basically lets you do smaller circuits and compare them at the same time to each other. And finally, it's a great tool to improve your understanding of RF circuits. It doesn't really teach you RF, but if you know a little bit to begin with, you can play around and learn an awful lot by seeing how things actually work. So let's get on and look at what we see when we see SimSmith come up and what actually is going on. All right, I'm going to bring up SimSmith for the very first time on a Windows 10 machine. And before I bring it up, I'm going to go and point to my user folder. And you don't need to do this. I just wanted to show what happens. My user folder ends with a shortcut to a place called Videos. Now, if I bring up SimSmith, a small version of SimSmith comes up, and I'm greeted with this error. This error says, unable to read last SimSmith circuit 14p10.ss. The version of SimSmith I brought up was 14p10. SimSmith is looking for a file called last SimSmith circuit 14p10.ss. It's looking for it in my user folder, and it doesn't exist, so I get that error. However, if I click on OK, and then I'm greeted with a list of changes that have occurred since the last version, and I can go through these if I wish, or I can say I know all this. It doesn't matter. You can look at these later if you want to. Then I end up with two files. These two files are the only files that SimSmith creates on your machine other than files that you create yourself. It does not create any files in places like apps data roaming or apps data local. It doesn't create any other files anywhere else. These are the only two files it creates other than the installation files that occurred when you installed it. These two files are instrumental in keeping SimSmith able to keep track of what's going on. The log file is almost always of size 0, and the only time it has any data in it is if you get an error. Errors are very infrequent now. They used to be a little more common, and I see them periodically as I debug stuff, but once a version gets released, they're very infrequent. However, this file needs to be there for everybody, and it needs to be there every time. If I get a new version of SimSmith, version 14p11, which I have a version on my machine right now here, I'm going to run it also. First time I run it, I get the same error for it too. And I say okay, and I know all this. I'm going to close that one off. I now created one of these. So you get various ones of these floating around. Each one of these files, I can delete this one right now. Each one of these files actually is a SimSmith file itself. So this is SimSmith's mechanism for keeping backups of things and keeping you kind of safe. If you load SimSmith without a file named, such as if you click on a .ss file, it loads directly. But if you load SimSmith just by clicking on a SimSmith icon, it loads whatever's in this file. This file is the last thing you did, and it is updated automatically. You don't update it at all. It gets updated pretty much anytime you do any changes to the circuit. So these two files are instrumental. Once you know they're there, once you know why you got the error, you can basically close this off and never worry about them again. So The window comes up in a small size. Let's just maximize it now and keep going. This is what you get when SimSmith comes up. Notice the top title here is vacant. We haven't named anything yet, and SimSmith didn't actually read a file. There's nothing wrong with using it right now, but if I was to close this and bring it back up again without a file specified, notice what it comes up with. It comes up with my user folder and this file. This is exactly what was in it last time. So if I was to put some stuff in this circuit, and the mechanics of how I'm doing this don't really matter. Here's stuff in my circuit. Now I just close off SimSmith. I don't save anything or anything at all like that. And I just bring it up again. What I get came from my last SimSmith circuit, 14p10.ss. It retained this. It remembered it. So SimSmith kind of can use this as a backup. It works very nicely. But you know, I'm just making everybody aware that it exists, and that's why you get the error the first time you get a new version of SimSmith, and subsequent new major versions cause the same issue too. So let's start with a clean circuit. This is what SimSmith comes up with when you have nothing there, you've done nothing beforehand at all. SimSmith consists of several parts. We've got a title bar here at the top, which we'll look at in a minute. We've got a circuit here. This is our circuit. It grows to the right. We have another area down here, which contains our components, our sweeping, a trash can, and a thing called the file chooser, which is basically how we can find stuff if we want within SimSmith. And it contains a chart. The chart can be a Smith chart. The chart can be a square chart. And there's 3 modes of operation for these charts. Ignoring the charts for a moment, these 2 fields rule the world. This little dot here determines the size of your components. This little dot here determines the size of this area down below. Whatever is left over is occupied by the chart. If you use up all the space, the chart gets small. If you give the chart enough room, it fills up to be the full height of the screen. So let's look at a few more things here. Let's look at the tabs that go across the top of SimSmith. The first tab contains new circuit. That should be self-explanatory. If we click on new circuit, we get a new circuit. Not much going on there. Load circuit description, that's loading the circuit that you've saved previously. Saving a circuit description, saves it. Saving a circuit description along with preferences. A circuit description consists of 2 things, the actual schematic and what to do, but also consists of preferences. Preferences are located down here, and they consist of a lot of things that make your circuit a little bit different than someone else's. A good example would be number of parameter digits. If you were working on something like a crystal filter, you might have this set to 7 digits. The reason being is that you're working over a very small frequency range and you need the accuracy. If you're working on a very fast machine, you might want the sweep size to be larger, the normal sweep size. This is the amount of sweeps that you can do and still be in real time. This is the amount of sweeps that take place in the non-real-time version whenever you actually click on the sweep button. I normally set this to somewhere around 4K on my machine, and I normally set this somewhere around 60 or 80K. Both of those, an extended sweep will take maybe 6 or 7 seconds. This is almost instantaneous. A lot of these other features are things that you can change in the program, but they just get you started whenever you click File New. One thing I do change every single time when I get a new version of SimSmith is the wheel gain. The wheel gain, in my opinion, is set way too low for how I use SimSmith, so I bumped this up to some number like 1.3 or 1.35. And the other thing I do is SimSmith normally comes with wheel tune direction set to none. The mouse wheel is an extremely important piece of SimSmith. Well, let me say this. If you intend to use it that way, it's an incredibly important piece of SimSmith, and you have to set this to something other than none. The two numbers after it, +1 and -1, are the direction which moving the wheel causes the values to increase or decrease. The wheel direction, as SimSmith normally comes, only affects the chart sizes. If you set this to a value, it can also be used to tune the values of the components. So I set those two things, and that's really about all that has to be done. I do set some other stuff, but it's not mandatory to getting started. Back to the file menu for a moment. So if you save a circuit with the preferences and you send it to somebody, they see those preferences with the file. Otherwise, if you just send them the circuit without the preferences, they use their own preferences. We'll skip the writing touchtone files. I don't think they're used too often. Documentation exists for them. Write plot results files. This allows you to take a plot that you get in SimSmith and write it out as a text-based file that then can be read into other programs and used. You can write the preferences if you want to keep track of what they were, for your own use. The second tab. Second tab is kind of an interesting tab, and the third tab. They're almost exactly the same. They both look like the same. The first one takes a piece of the chart, the whole window, just the circuit right here. The charts as shown, just the charts. Smith chart only. SWR or gain charts, which would be this chart. It saves those as a file. The same thing exists for captures, except in captures, what happens is you put the data on the clipboard as opposed to putting it in a file. So let's add a component to the circuit. Let's go to capture here and say capture circuit. Now the clipboard has this circuit on it. If I go into my machine and bring up Microsoft Word, and I go over here and I do Control-V to paste, I'll paste the circuit that I just clipped. This circuit, of course, can be resized just fine. If I come down in my circuit here and let's say I wanted to capture the Smith chart, I captured it, go back to Word, I paste it, there it is. Paste at the cursor location. My cursor was above the other graph. So this is a good way to be able to document what you're working on in SimSmith. You can put it in Word. You can put it in any program you want that can do paste. But that's whoops. Let's go. I meant to save. Meant to get rid of Word. Let's bring SimSmith back again here. At this point in time, SimSmith just came back with the circuit we were just working on. That was a good example of losing SimSmith and being able to recover from it immediately. I'm going to turn this dot off. This dot says try to keep the file chooser active if possible. It was clicked from something I had done before. This is a new version from where I was just a little while ago when I started the video. It's a new version. It's going to be released today, and it's got some interesting features in it, and I'm using it for the video, partially to make sure that everything seems to be working fine in it, and it appears to be fine at the moment. So continuing on here, we've looked at these three tabs. The library tab is a tab that I used to use a lot. I used to be able to have a library file that contained components, and those components that it contained were easy to go get and drag back in your circuit. And a good example would be of these components would be things that you wanted to do repeatedly. I have components that are attenuators. I have some components that are certain specific tuner pieces. And this has kind of been superseded with the file chooser now, because the file chooser, you can make a folder, and you can just drag stuff into your folder. The stuff that you drag into your folder is very much the same as just the library. So I don't really use the library very much at all, and it's just a holdover from times past. The standards. I've never used this one ever. It doesn't come with any files. You can create files to go in here, and there's standard values of components, and those are the values that SimSmith will pick. When you're doing stuff in RF, generally there aren't a lot of standard values for some stuff. perhaps resistors, but if you get to be a power resistor, you probably want to put something in the circuit that deals with the non-idealness of the resistor, like some parallel capacitance and things like that. Anyways, I don't use these. I don't know of anyone who uses them. They may be used by some people, but I just don't use them. References. References are interesting. If you save something, a plot, you can bring it back in and add it as a reference. And adding a reference gives you a way, kind of the way EasyNet works in terms of comparing two things. I've never used this either. When I became involved with SimSmith was just about at the time when SimSmith included the isolation block. And the isolation block basically allows you to do two circuits at the same time, which is kind of the same as doing a circuit and then bringing it back in and comparing it. The View tab, again, I don't use very often. There's a parameter report that shows some generally non-interesting parameters useful for debugging, and it can bring up the file chooser. But the file chooser can also be brought up right from here, so I don't use it. I don't use this tab hardly at all. The Help tab I use an awful lot. The Help tab contains documentation for SimSmith. And this documentation is spread out over quite a few documents. The basic place to start is the primer. The primer's the original features in SimSmith and the features that are most like a normal Smith chart program. The presenter includes a lot of other newer features that deal with things like sweeping and plotting, which are some really powerful features in SimSmith, but it is a secondary document, not the primary document. There was an article that Ward had written for the QRP Quarterly, and it's very interesting. It describes SimSmith in a basic fashion. It was written a while back, so the pictures for SimSmith aren't quite right because SimSmith has changed a little bit over time, but it's very interesting reading. Now there's three other pieces of documentation here: the F block, the N block, and the ruse. This says ruse, it really means ruse block. And those are components down here: the F block, the N block, and the ruse block. And in these blocks contain the real power of SimSmith. You can put circuits of any kind of arbitrary complexity in SimSmith if you wish. It's definitely not a beginner feature in SimSmith, but it's a lot of power. And these are documented in those three tabs. These all come up as a PDF file that's contained within the SimSmith installation. Additionally, we have recent changes. Recent changes brings up that little note that you saw when you first brought SimSmith up for the first time. It was a new version, and you can go back and look at old ones as long as you want until you wish to say, "I know all this," and you can go back and look at them again at any time. The recent changes deal with some little small things. If you go up here and see latest release notes, it came up in a different window from where I was using it last. They list more global things, bigger things. They're not so much the little things. But again, it goes back a long ways. Certainly you can visit the website. Visiting the website gets how you get the program in the first place. Website is ae6ty.com. If you go to just the home page of it, you can go to get a tab to go to Smith Charts. You can go here directly and get the Smith Charts. Program to install is right here. I'm using 14.11, and 14.11 will be available within the next day. And let's see what else is left in here. Oh, you got reset screen size and location and reset Smith chart size, reset screen size. These are things that appear in the preferences here, and I generally don't use them, but there's an interesting thing: resetting the screen size. If you want to do a bunch of captures and compare them somewhere to each other, you want all of them captured at the same size. And it's a way to get SimSmith to run at a certain size for capturing stuff that's not full screen. So it has some usefulness there. I've done it for some stuff I put on a website and things where I wanted all the graphs to be exactly the same size. But other than that, I don't use that too often. Then there's this little tab here. It says send mail to AE6TY. if you get a failure in SimSmith that SimSmith cannot recover from, it'll pop up a little box and it'll ask you to send those 2 files in your user directory, the error file, the error log file, and the last SimSmith file, and to send them to Ward. You basically just attach those to an email, tell him what you think happened, and he'll fix it. So this is pretty much it for the help menu. Again, help menu is a good place to be. File menu is a good place to be. Captures occasionally, and notes. The last thing is a notes block. Notes is a little bit of a, it's kind of put in there for some documentation, but it has an interesting feature in that it's the last block. So the first line of the notes field appears right here. So let's show a notes block. This notes block is blank. If you want to move it, you grab the upper left corner, you can move it. You want to change its size, grab the lower right corner, you can change its size. We can go in here and we can say this is line 1 and line 2. Now this doesn't make much sense, but if we do this, notice up above all we saw was this is line 1. So you can put a line in here that can tell you that this circuit is done for such and such reason, whatever you want to, and down here you can put anything else you want to put. This block is opaque. It sits on top of everything else in your circuit. You are capable of putting it someplace that maybe doesn't interfere with the circuit if you wish to. The text is auto-sized, as is everything in SimSmith. It's auto-sized. So if you want this text to be a little smaller, well, make the box a little smaller. And you can make the text any size you want then. And that's pretty much it for the top line. This notes field can be hidden, but when you hide it, you still see line 1 of the notes field. So it's kind of a nice reminder, and I use it not so much for myself, but if I send somebody a file, I use it pretty regularly because it's a reminder when they load the file what the thing is actually doing, which is kind of a nice feature. The next video I'm going to do, I'm going to stop here in just a second. The next video is going to deal with navigating around SimSmith, adding components to a circuit, changing their values and stuff. And that'll be the second and last video that described the real basic just moving around. After that, we're going to start working on solving problems that are simple in nature, but often misunderstood. And then along the way, we'll learn a lot more different features about SimSmith and those types of things. So thank you very much. If you enjoy it, come back and look at the next video. And I think there's going to be about 8 or 10 in this series. I appreciate it, and hope everyone's enjoyed this.